Before we go into the podcast, I want to just talk about a business that I've set up with my friend George. It is called the Podcast Introduction Group. So if you want to join and be able to be featured on 24 to 48 podcasts to be able to reach an amazing audience, this is the place you need to go to. Podcast, being a guest on podcasts, is automatically establishing you as an authority and is able to build your personal and professional brand. We handpick of a bank of podcasters that we have to be able to grow your business and brand. We do 100% of everything that needs to be done by my team. You do not need to lift a finger. You are able to expose yourself to new and relevant markets by going on other people's podcasts. You also are able to create brand loyalty. People will love listening to you and coming back to your products or services, and it's able to increase your revenue. So if you want to be able to get involved, you can sign up quickly, registered with an account manager. There's an onboarding call where we target the podcasts that you want to be on, the type that you want, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, health, fitness, whatever it is. We then match you to those podcasts and you can start your journey. We have regular catch-ups with our account managers, and Google ranks you when people search for you. So when people are searching for you, you're able to see your podcasts at the top of the list. So if you're interested in being a podcast guest on multiple podcasts, we are the place to go. If you go to podcastintroduction.com and go and register your details, we will have a quick call with you, match your podcast that you want to be on, and we can then start this process ASAP. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Back onto the podcast then. Today we have Glenn Hopper, who's the Chief Financial Officer at Sandline. Hello, Glenn. How are you?
Hey, doing good. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. This is a really interesting area. I was involved in Big Four in their tech, like finance area. So there's a little bit of synergy here. So hopefully, but you've done a lot of work with startups as well. So there's some really interesting stuff that we're going to talk about today. So as normal, the podcast is called Absolute Business Mindset. First question to you is, what does business mindset mean to you?
Good question. And I may come to it from a different space than you would expect from a CFO.
Okay.
Because CFOs are generally risk averse. And when I'm dealing with the company's money, I am risk averse, and I'm very cautious with that. But I'm also kind of a serial entrepreneur, and I've spent the past 2 decades in the startup space, including founding and, having a couple of successes and a couple of ones that didn't go. And that's just the nature of the business. But I think the absolute business mindset to me, it starts in the early days with trying to build a better mousetrap. Just this compulsion that you have, not a compulsion to be rich, to be the next Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk. Certainly that could be a part of it, but really just an idea that you, from the startup world, that you can create something and you're driven, and that's what you're passionate about, is bringing something new to the world. Right. And so I've been in that role as a founder, but I've found that that's great to have business ideas. And you think about where businesses pretty early on, you can usually tell if they're going to go or they're going to fail. And what I've found in my last 3 businesses is, you may have heard the term before, trough of disillusionment.
No. Okay. Yeah.
So, you have these startups, you have these people that have these great ideas. They're working 24/7 around the clock, just trying to do everything they can to service the customer, and they grow their business and they grow their business. They grow it to a point where this cowboy mentality that they've had and trying to do everything just off the cuff and without a plan doesn't work anymore. And you can't grow because you've already maxed out your resources that you have. So then the business can start to drop off, and you have to address what you didn't do in the beginning. The beginning was all about front of the house and product and what you're passionate about. And most people aren't passionate about the back office, but to go from that startup phase to scale up, you've got to have someone in here who's doing the process. And so for me, I love the startup mentality. I think that's a big part of the business mindset. But if you want a scalable business that's going to grow, you've got to focus on the process. And that's where I've spent the majority of my career, is putting processes in place.
So building processes and systems for the business to scale.
Yeah.
Interesting. Really interesting. Thank you very much for that detailed explanation. So your first passion was actually journalism all the way back. You studied it, and then you were in the US Navy as a journalist. What was it that drove you, or sort of what seduced you into journalism?
Well, it's funny because journalism wasn't my first passion.
Okay.
My first passion was to write fiction. And at 18, 19 years old, I was always, running around with a notebook and writing stories and writing poems, trying to impress women. I don't
Did it work?
Not really, which is probably the reason that I had the realization, I guess, early in college. I had the realization that you want to keep writing fiction, but don't rely on that for an income. So I switched my major to journalism and thought, okay, well, I'll get better at the craft of writing and study journalism. And truthfully, I really enjoyed journalism. And the job doesn't even exist in the Navy anymore, at least not in a military position. I guess they probably have civilians doing it, but I was in the Navy as a journalist, and I was the editor of a monthly news magazine that focused on a Naval Technical Training Center. And I would find soft pieces, interviewing people about their hobbies, and kind of like, people do on podcasts. And it was good. It got me used to communicating, and it got me better at communicating. And honestly, I think that is something that I rely on to this day. And I think when I decided, I got married and realized, okay, so journalism does pay some of the bills, but I need to find something that pays the bills a little better than journalism. And that's when I went to business school and decided to switch. But it's something that I write a lot, obviously with the book out, and with I'm always contributing. I've got a site on Medium. I've got a blog. I contribute to Forbes. So I'm still always writing. And that's kind of, to this day, that's the way I solve problems, is kind of write through them.
Right. Before we go, so it's very interesting what you said about the journalism and the role that it gives, and communication is so important in business. It's massively important. I just want, before we go, I'm teasing you a little bit. Have you ever tried to get any of this early stuff released as a book, poetry?
So actually, I wrote and produced an independent film back in 2007, right. And it actually got distribution. It's called The Hanged Man. It's terrible, but I think the contract is expired. I never saw a nickel from it, but you can still, I guess maybe Netflix still has a copy of the DVD. Wow. So if anyone's still getting DVDs, you can actually find the movie if it's not scratched all to hell. But,
is it not on YouTube or anything like that? You could
but I should do something with it, because the contract expired a few years ago, and it's just been, I've still got the original cut and all the film on it, and I might probably wouldn't hurt to put it out there.
That's why not. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And other than that, I'm sitting right now on a 200,000 word space opera that may be unreadable. I don't know, but it's just something I do in my spare time. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it'll see the light of day at some point. Maybe I'll self-publish that one. I don't know.
Fantastic. All right. So I understand the sort of passion for writing drove you towards journalism, but you said there was a point where you're like, I've got to pay the bills. I need to go into business. And you did an MBA and you were at Harvard as well as a graduate. Why did you choose business from a practical point because you thought it could earn you more money, or was there actually a passion there for business at the start?
We'll be back after a quick break. Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show. Meet the future of healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, meet the future of healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
I had an interesting transition to business. So I was a journalist, and this was in the late 90s. Internet was first coming on, and I guess I got interested. I've always been interested in technology too. So from the time I was a little kid, programming on my Commodore 64, and writing in BASIC and all that. So I've never wanted to earn a living with that. I need more interaction and there's maybe more social things, and but I've always been interested. And so when I was a journalist, it was a pretty interesting time in the late 90s because for photography, we were going from film to digital, which that was a big learning curve. And then this monthly news magazine that did come out, it was, 40 pages a month, a magazine. And there were budget cuts going on. So, and this new thing called the internet. So I had to learn HTML because we were going to move the magazine to the internet. And we ended up reducing the size of the publication, but putting out daily articles on the internet. So I got interested in the technology, and I thought with the journalism background and the technology, if I went to business school, I pictured a career in marketing for me, product management. And that was my first job out of the Navy. Once I finished business school, was going to marketing for a telecom company. I was a product manager for some web-based products back in the early 2000s.
So there wasn't because as CFO, you've got to be quite business minded, quite financially minded as well. These are not, and this is not, don't think it's criticism, but these are not sort of the natural path of being an accountant or being a sort of naturally a corporate finance investment bank or something like that, where you need the basis. You went from journalism to marketing and then into sort of more pure finance business. What was that driving force into finance? Because you spent seven years plus in corporate finance as well, didn't you?
Yes. So in marketing, it's right brain, left brain. I'm dealing with all these creative types, and we had a limited budget for all the stuff we wanted to do. And it was a telecom company, so obviously the focus was voice and then internet connectivity. But then we had this suite of services that were just meant to be almost giveaways, but I was passionate about them and I was very interested in them, but I was battling for resources to get help development on my projects. And every time I would go to my boss and say, hey, we need to do this, I want this new feature, she would say, we don't have the budget for that. We don't have the budget for that. So finally I asked, can I see the budget? and then ultimately, once I got that, I kind of took over and revamped the marketing budget. And then I became the de facto numbers guy for the marketing department. And then in going to these budget meetings with the senior leadership of the company, I ended up meeting with the C-level people. And after about less than a year, I guess, of being the marketing or the budget guy, the finance guy for marketing, the COO actually poached me to be his finance guy because there was a lot of kingdom building back then and a lot of silos. So everybody wanted their own. So, but that was an interesting transition into finance because I didn't come to it with and this is the world I live in now. So it's going to sound negative, but I can't think of a better way to say it, but pure finance, it's kind of an ivory tower. You're just looking at everything in the abstract and there's numbers and you've got to hit your budget and all that. But coming to it from operations, I was initially arguing for increased budget from operations and explaining to the finance department that made the budget why I needed the budget I needed and why I needed access to their information. And I got in good with the operations group, and that mentality has stuck with me through my whole career of you're not just the number, you're not the CF as we're sometimes called.
I love it. I've not heard that before. I think that's brilliant. Yeah.
So it really, that was kind of a cool way to come into finance because it taught me the importance and the understanding of listening to operations, listening to sales and marketing, listening to the groups about what they needed, and not just making everything about the bottom line. And ultimately that, yes, you have to get there, but being more of a partnership. And I think it's helped me a lot in my finance career.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The best CFOs and the best people that have taken on finance responsibilities, from my experience at Big Four, they weren't necessarily these were accountants because they would at PwC. But I can just think of a couple of guys that took on those responsibilities, but they came very much from the practice and understood the business side of it and the transactions, and rather than just a pure accounting sort of approach to bookkeeping sort of approach. So I think that's really valuable. I think for my listeners, don't think that the role of the CFO is unattainable because you don't necessarily have bookkeeping or accounting experience. You can bring a different angle on the role of a CFO that actually can give you exceptionally good experience and sort of benefit your career. So okay, so then you moved into startups then, HCT Investments, which was sold. But why don't you tell me about your role there?
Sure. So I really enjoyed my time in telecom, and I'd moved up through the ranks decently. I started as a product manager, moved in to finance, and by the time I left the telecommunications company, I had a lofty title of senior director of budget management or something like that. And at 30 years old, that was a pretty good title. I was managing a budget of about $170 million. And I was working primarily with C-suite people. I actually had an office. They called it the teak area because we had teak walls over in the area, and it was me and all the big shots. So I felt like I was doing pretty good. And we were going through merger after merger. I was a big part of the due diligence teams and the post-merger integration. And I think I could have kept a career doing that. But then I had an opportunity from someone who was actually an investor in the telecommunications company and who was a VC guy and had I guess it was a private placement for him at a retail business. And they were running it early with a couple of young people that were kind of carving out what they were doing. It was that cowboy phase that I was talking about. And they wanted to, it had all been self-funded, and they wanted to leverage the business. So they gave me an opportunity to go from this decent, medium-sized fish in a bigger pond to a big fish in a really small pond. And I liked the idea, and it was going to be a bigger equity stake than what I'd gotten in telecom. And I liked the idea of sort of building something from scratch. And even though the telecom company was still growing and the industry was still growing, I was lured away by this startup world. And I've been there ever since. I mean, I guess the telecom technically was a startup as well, because I was the 75th employee there. And we went through, 7 or 8 mergers and grew to 1,300 employees and 400 million in revenue or so by the time I left. So, but it had lost that startup feel. It was in the grinding it out corporate world then. And so I had an opportunity to jump ship, get a loftier title, and get some equity. And
so my question to you at that stage, were you going to be paid a salary, or did you just get equity at the start, or did you have both?
So I actually had both. And it was it was a very profitable business when I got there. It was expensive to build the individual units, and they just wanted to bring someone in that could help, manage those bank relationships and sort of do FP&A that they hadn't done before.
What's FP&A?
Financial planning and analysis, which is actually my favorite part of the finance area, because I get to geek out and use all my analytics and do linear regressions and just come up with cool things to build out the budget. Yeah.
And so how you were there for how long, and how much did you grow it in that time?
So I was there from, let's see, about 7 years, almost 8, I guess about 8 years. And we grew it from the third unit had just opened when I got there, and we grew it to 13 by the time we sold it. And it was a grind, because it's about, at that time, maybe the early ones were 2 to 3 million per location to build, and then they got more expensive as time went on. And so being able to grow and dealing with local governments and kind of a regional business I learned a lot. But looking back, it was, man, it was a lot of work to grow. I mean, we quadrupled the size of the business in that time, and that was great. But I think there are so many other businesses that are built to scale a lot faster that, it was, but I say that I don't know if I'd have put that much time into a single business, but we had a really nice exit. So I don't know. Everything worked out well in that one in the end.
And so you sold that to what, another investment company?
So there was a Leonard Green backed a company that was consolidating in the industry, and they had like a $400 million fund, and they were buying up regional businesses, and we got a really good deal on that. And I guess one of the things I learned in that was they purchased the book of business and how well we were doing on our income statement and on the financials, but we got a premium for it based on what I was talking about earlier. And I consider this like internal intellectual property. We got a premium on the business for all the work we'd done in automation and back office operations. And it was, I think they adopted a lot of the tools that we were using to automate back office processes.
And how much were multiples of the revenue did you sell it for?
So that was on EBITDA, that was 10 and a half times EBITDA, which I think without the back end would have been under 10. And we actually, once they'd already made the offer and we were in due diligence, they actually, I don't remember exactly how this happened, but they actually increased their offer while we were already in due diligence. And I think it was as they dove in, and maybe it got to a kind of a frustrating point where they sensed we were getting cold feet. So they threw a little more at it. And what they used as justification was they didn't realize early on how great these systems were. So,
and was the sale of that business life-changing?
It wasn't,
Put it differently. Was it financial freedom? I suppose that's probably a better way of describing it.
Not for the rest of my life. It wouldn't have been, because right now I've got 2 kids in private college and, and certain lifestyles, but it was enough to breathe a little easy and know that you've got room then to go make your own decisions and you're not beholden to living paycheck to paycheck. And that's something that first exit was kind of what it set the tempo and the pace for the rest of my life, certainly.
And then you sold another business in 2020, Cicadia. So
yes.
Was that a similar role you had there as well? So
that was a CFO role, but I was brought into that company. That company had been around for 8 or 10 years, or about 8 years, I guess, when I came in. And that company there was some private equity in it. And the idea, they want to get in and out of a business 4 to 6 years. 6 years is kind of the max of how long they want to be in a business. And they'd been in 8 years there. And some of the individual investors were getting older and they were trying to wind down their portfolios. And they just said, go in, get this thing ready to sell, get it ready to stand up to due diligence, to quality of earnings reports, to audits and all that. Because I guess it had been, it was a going concern in that they were paying their bills, they were going, but it didn't have any growth, and they wanted out of it. So I had to come in and again, streamline the back office operations, really get a handle on their finances so that we could, when it came time to sell, be able to talk about them and, make improvements and efficiencies in the business, and then figure out how to value this business to sell it. And when it was a business that was kind of flat in general.
Okay, so it plateaued.
Yeah,
as a business. What's the law like? So let me just give you a little bit of background. You may or may not know this about me. I gave up my corporate job of 14 years, 2 companies, 2020, October 2020, and started a couple of businesses myself. And for me personally, there was a law of startups of building something, creating something. I'd already done it through these podcasts. I've done 4 years, 360 odd episodes. So I'd already seen the sort of start of this sort of startup in my life already. But for me, there was just something very exciting about creating something and then selling it, and there being a value on what you're creating, which is different to corporate world, where it's a lot more. I always talk about corporate world a bit like a big cruise liner, and it takes a very long time for you to be able to change the course, because it has to go through lots of different people's views and thoughts and ideas and what do they think. What for you is the exciting stage of working in a startup?
So I look back to my time in the corporate world, and I realize, and maybe, I think it's different when you're more senior, but I wasn't super senior back then. And in the corporate world, you're selling your time. That's really what you're trading your time for money. And I was putting in a lot of time, and I had a young family, and I was putting in 70 hours a week and just crushing it. And I was being rewarded for it. But ultimately it felt like even though everybody in the company was, in air quotes, a partner, meaning we had options in the company. And so we could share in the success, but it wasn't, our carve out was a small portion of it. The investment bankers and private equity and VC guys that were in, they were going to get the most of the money out of it. And I guess that's when the corporate world, once we'd already created everything and we were running efficiently, but it was about M&A and then getting incrementally more efficient and incrementally better, I kind of lost interest in it. And then going to a startup, whether you're there in the very first days where everything is blue sky and you're just drawing it out on a whiteboard, imagining all the possibility, that's great. That's fun. That's almost like writing. That's a completely creative exercise. You don't limit yourself by the financial concerns. You're just pie in the sky. Let's build the coolest thing ever. And that's fun. But then once you get past that, and once you do start talking about the reality and the funding, but to watch something be built. In my life, I've done things like I restored an old Jeep. I don't know anything. I wasn't a mechanic when I started it, but I thought I love the idea. And this house that we live in is 120 years old, and we redid this house when we moved in. So I love the idea of rebuilding or building something, and you get to do that every day in the startup world. And even when you get to what I was talking about earlier of that startup to scale up, you're building processes and you're making it better, and you can see immediate impact of what you're doing. And then part of it, but I would put this last, but part of it is the potential for a great exit. And I look back, I've done a couple of startups that failed, didn't have a great exit, but still it was an expensive experience in a couple of cases, but I love the experience that I had in it. And I love that ultimately I'm the one that's accountable and responsible for it.
And so your failures of startups, how did you get to that point where, did these companies fold? Basically, did they shut down? How is that, if you're in the sort of the board of directors, the sort of echelon, the top echelon of the business, how does that mindset, how do you get to that point? Because some of these guys probably were founders that had started this business and it was their baby. They'd spent years or a great period of their time building this business. How do you know when it's time to shut it down, and how does that affect you and other people that were in that business?
I think there's two ways this goes. One is if you're a founder, and whether you're by yourself or you have a partner, if you're the founder and you're bootstrapping this business, you don't have any outside money, you can get your blinders on, and nobody's going to tell you your baby's ugly. You trust yourself, and you think, let me just battle through this. Give me one more month. I can get there. And you're doing that, and you're pouring, sometimes good money after bad, because you stop being rational because you're so passionate about what you're doing and you believe in it. So if you're in that road where you're bootstrapping something and you're putting more of your own money and more of your own time, and you're not reading the writing on the wall, then you could lead to ruin. And finally, you have to just look back and you tell yourself all along, oh, those are sunk costs, they don't matter. But because your personal, unless you've won a lottery or something, your personal finances are limited. You're dealing with finite resources, and how much are you going to pour into this business that isn't taking off? You make the projections every year, you're not hitting, or every month or every week you're redoing your projections, you're not hitting them. You finally have to realize what's going on and stop it. However, one thing that I learned is, and if you take outside money, this is going to happen for you. And I used to think this was not good, but now looking back, I think it is having a board of directors. So if somebody puts money, they're going to have a seat on the board, and they're going to help call the shots and not let you get this tunnel vision. And they're going to stay objective. If it's a private equity guy who's on boards of multiple companies, they're not going to give any particular love to yours if you're not hitting your numbers. So I think whether you're bootstrapping something or you've taken funding, put a board in place so that you can have someone that will tell you, man, this isn't working. You gotta, we have to think about something else. And I think maybe I was guilty a little bit of that one business because I was a founder. I was loving what we were doing. It was a streaming audio technology business, and it was just fun. I loved the people I was working with. I loved talking to it was, direct to consumer. We were streaming live audio on the internet, and it was a lot of fun. And the idea was we were going to build up this free user-based community. Then we were going to start having ads, but we couldn't get critical mass on the users, and it wasn't even worth putting ads in because we wouldn't get enough income from the ads. And finally we had to let it go. And and it was sad because we'd actually we had few enough users that I felt like we became friends with some of them. And we probably ran that one on for about 6 months longer than we should, just hoping we would catch something. The funny thing is there's all kinds of models out there right now, 7 years later, that are doing the exact same thing. A little early on that one, I guess.
Well, yeah, no, and there is an element of luck when it comes to business, hitting the right trend at the right time, and sometimes that's foresight, sometimes that's luck, or sometimes sometimes being too early to the market can be as damaging as being too late and it being too competitive. So, I've seen that quite a lot with people, that they make the right choice to stop a business because it's not hitting a trend, it's not catching fire. But actually, sometimes it's because you're early to the game rather than late, which I think is so fascinating how it can be that for a business. One of the questions I really wanted to ask you, and it sounds like you were saying earlier on that it's a great passion of yours. So you've gone through the first year or two of a business, you've created a client base, you might be doing quite well, but that whole point of scaling a business, which is a totally different skill set to start in a business. So you start a business and it's all chaotic. You've got lots of generalists all helping out, sort of checking in into marketing, into sales, into finance, HR, whatever. Everyone's mucking in. But that point where you've grown enough that you want to accelerate into scaling, how does an entrepreneur that's listening to this at the moment, who's struggling with how to get that scale of a business, how do you approach it when you enter a new business?
My approach is, it doesn't make me super popular when I get there, because think about showing up to a startup where everyone's a cowboy. They've either got funny, lofty titles that they made up for themselves, or they don't have titles. And like you said, everybody's doing everything, and it's the opposite of silos, which can be great. But when you've got 2 or 3 founders and they're all poking their head in everything, then they're doing things by email, and they're doing stuff on spreadsheets, and they think they've got this system. But then you come in and you say, how many hours a day are you working? How many hours a week are you working? And how many hours a week were you working when you first started? And, you've been doing this 2.5 years, and you're working 100 hours a week every week and sleeping in the break room here at the office half the time. Is that how you want to spend the rest of your life? And founders are passionate people, and that's a lot of times why they do it. But when you can come in and say, how about we find a better way to do this? And so what makes me not popular when I get there, but ultimately it lets me get on the path to be a hero, is I do what's basically an ISO 9000 audit, which I don't know if you've ever seen an ISO 9000.
No,
And
it's an audit for a company, is it?
yes, and this is not because I want to be ISO 9000 certified, and I've actually modified mine, but you basically go end to end from, and depending on what your business is, but from when you have a lead or a prospect all the way through, you win the sale, you onboard them, and all the way through their invoicing, payment, and when they eventually churn. But you go through and you look at who's doing what, and you find where sticking points are, where there's an individual gatekeeper or an inefficient process that requires a lot of repetitive manual data entry, or something that should be passed via an API from one system to another, but instead they're keying all this information in a spreadsheet and then sharing the spreadsheet that's getting written over. And these are all things that happen over and over. And I've seen it in multiple startups. And then, but when you sit down and you map it out and you talk to everybody from service delivery to provisioning to sales, and you talk to them about what they do, and you say, well, isn't that inefficient? You're selling this inventory and you've got a shared spreadsheet that you don't know. You may be selling inventory that you don't have in stock, and you can point out where all these inefficiencies are and say, what if we could save 20% of your time by automating this? Then what's the opportunity cost there? Yeah. It's either a work-life balance, or you're doing more work or more value-added work. So it's kind of painful. You come in and they're having all this fun as a startup, and you become the process guy. But once you get through it, and once you find these areas of improvement, it gives you a roadmap to get automation, to get back office. And once you get, if you try to hit that scale up point, the hockey stick that every startup founder wants in their growth, if you get there and you don't have these processes in place, you're doomed. So it's a decent pitch, but it's a lot of work. And when they're very busy and inefficient, it's hard to get people to focus on it, but you can show them results pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you say about doing that sort of audit, because I'm just thinking about one of the businesses that I run, and we're very much in the early stages in the sort of scaling up of a business, but because as I said, I'm thinking about a reference to someone else that I know that's been through this, and a lot of the people that got them to the second or third year of their business, once you start scaling, the generalists are not required anymore, and you need specialists, HR, finance, etc. That's actually a really difficult transition for a business to actually go through. And you do say, like, setting the systems and processes, but in lots of cases, a lot of the people that were there doing their damnedest to get you up and running aren't actually the right people to scale a business, are they?
That's so funny. I've dealt with that in my last two companies, definitely, where people either they have to shift and find their focus and find their new role, or they're going to be gone. And it's weird, because if somebody's been there from the very beginning, and I think about the different types of power, and it's been a long time since I've done industrial and organizational psychology, but there's the power of your rank, there's social power, but expert power is what I think of. And these generalists are experts in however convoluted and crazy the system is of that startup. They're experts, they're PhDs in that business. And and a lot of them are real defensive of the information that they have, and they don't want to do things different because they get their power from being the one who knows where all the bones are buried. And so that's probably the biggest point of conflict, is if you have, especially if they're a very early employee or a founder. Usually founders are fine. They'll pick their lane and get to it. But early employees, sometimes there is some shedding of them, and they'll never understand why they were let go.
Yeah, absolutely. And financial automation. So you've talked about that as being a key component of that. How do you implement that? If you were looking to automate sections of the finances for a business, how would you start that process? How would you approach it?
It goes back to the audit that I was talking about, and the first thing I do is look at, and when I talk about finance automation, I'm overstepping traditional CFO boundaries. I'm not talking about just the finance department. It is going all the way back to the very front end. If they've got a CRM, if they're using Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever they're using on the front end, I want to start collecting data right there And then I want that data to move through whether, if they're not one, whatever, they can stay in the sales and pipeline. But if they're one, if you sell that business, I want that automatically to come into whether it's a CRM tool that you track customer lifecycle, or a project management tool and accounting. Take out the manual data entry of they've already entered the information in one system, go enter it in another. So it's about getting APIs and whatever middleware, we don't have to get into the specifics of the technology, but basically getting the systems speaking to each other. And where I look, so overall, that's what I want to do, is have every system speaking to each other. But I look for those early wins so that I can show a difference, because if you just have people doing all this extra work to set up the automation, because it's painful up front, but then it makes your life so much easier. So I look for those spots that I identify in the audit where here's where we're bogged down. We're waiting on one person in the company is the only person who can do this. Well, guess what? That's going to be the first thing we knock out. And then you get here and you're rekeying information that was in another system. Well, we're going to knock that out. We're only going to enter the data once, and it's going to have a unique identifier that rolls through all the systems. And then, then there's maybe a system that requires you manually go look at something and hand copy it over. So there are spaces along there. And if you go through and you put out the biggest fires first, you start having these wins. And then you go from that really annoying guy that made me stop and describe what I do every day, like the consultant from Office Space. And then you become, wow, you're making my life easier. And I think people, regardless of their role in the company, when they're spending more of their time doing strategic work, doing mindful work versus mindless data entry or whatever they were having to do to wrangle the system before, you start to make a difference, and not just in how efficient the company is, but in employee morale.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So what's the plan for the next 2 to 5 years?
So I have the last 2 companies I've come in, not right in the early days of founding the company, but I have come in this trough of disillusionment, and I help get them ready. In the case of my last business, it was getting ready for sale. In this business where I am, it is taking them to a point, it was a bootstrapped business, and taking them to a point where they could look at reaching out to a private equity group. And the reason that they wouldn't have done it before I got there maybe is, if you're going to a private equity group, they want that 4 to 6 year exit. They want to know how you're going to grow enough to make it worth their investment. And if you can go to them and say, we have streamlined our back office operations, and look how good our details are, look how good our processes are, then one of the biggest ways that private equity backed companies grow is through mergers and acquisitions. And if you can go and tell the investors, I will be because of my back office operations and because of how good our processes are, we should be the lead dog in these M&A activities. And then they can say, okay, let me invest in the one that has it right. So then we pull in these smaller companies or mergers of equals, whatever they are, but we're going to use this company's processes because they've got it down. And then that gives them the comfort that they're going to be able to grow the company faster and be able to get a bigger return on their investment. So that's my focus where I am now, is just in efficiency. And that's efficiency in systems and people and the roles that they're doing and the tasks that they're performing, and not just in finance, but across the company.
M&A, acquiring a business. So have you been in a situation, a sort of Pixar Disney stage, where you're actually by revenue a smaller business, but by profitability you're quite clearly a better run business? Have you been in that situation where you've been a smaller business and acquired maybe a larger company and built that way?
So not specifically that, but I have to go back to telecommunications here. Back then, there was a lot of early 2000s, a lot of investment in telecom, but burn rate for these companies, was so high. So there were several mergers that were done that were treated as stock only mergers. And it became, a couple of them were considered mergers of equals, but maybe the other company was a little bigger than we were, but we were able to negotiate. Maybe they were a little bigger, but they didn't have the liquidity that we did. So they needed us more than we needed them. So we were able to leverage that. And then there was a lot of, in that era, a lot of investor stuff moving around and dilution of stock and stuff going on. So there's, but I know what you're talking about with the Disney Pixar thing, and that would be an amazing situation to be in. I have not been fortunate enough to be in something like that, but you see the reason for it.
So just on the M&A, I'm really fascinated about this because we're not in that position yet, but we've got competitors in one of our businesses, and we see the way they act and what they do, and there's pros and cons to all businesses. But how do you target a company to actually acquire?
So you're talking about just a strategic acquisition.
Yeah, just a strategic acquisition.
So you look at what your goal is. And if your goal is just adding customers, adding revenue, you would look for a business that I know in my industry, when we've been looking for companies to buy, when you're in a really small stage, you look at acqui-hires sometimes. So you buy a really small company that really what you want is the person who's running it, right? Because they're going to bring value, and you can bring them in and say, well, we can get their book of business, but also, and maybe we can, instead of having to pay upfront for everything, we could say, we're buying this business, but we really want your team and you. So to that end, we'll give you some money now, and then we'll put you on an earnout. So if you keep growing like you have been, but you grow our business, we're going to give you targets over 1, 2, 3 years that you can hit. And it'll be maybe a higher multiple than what you would do there. So there's that approach. And there's, if you're just buying, in my last company, we were looking for companies to buy, and we were actually targeting people who seemed like they were near retirement age, had been doing it a while, and thought if they could get a cash payday, they might just walk away and we could just take their business. And because we had the systems in place, we would be able to just kind of roll in what they were doing and then just have a bump to our revenue. And we the same thing, we'd offer them an earnout. And we'd basically, the way we did it would be we'd say, here's where we value your business based on discounted cash flow or comps and whatever. You know, if you're dealing with really small businesses, they're not doing real sophisticated valuations. A lot of times it is on comps more than anything, and just a multiple, sometimes of top line, sometimes of EBITDA. But we always tried to save cash and to help to what you were buying to have that role and contribute to building your company. We always tried to put those 3 years for us is what we wanted, a 3-year earnout.
Right. It's fascinating. It's an area which I don't know a lot about, but I can definitely see the growth of businesses can be very much directed about the acquisitions that they buy along the way. It can be really important. We could almost do a whole another episode just on M&A, which maybe we'll do at a later stage. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I asked the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quick-fire questions. They don't need a quick-fire answer. The first one is, what's the best decision that you made?
I think, and it was painful because I had to move my whole family, and I moved them from one state here in the U.S. to another when my career was going pretty well. But I think the best decision I made was leaving the telecom company when we'd got into a size that was big enough, and then going back to the small startups. It gave me a level of freedom, a level of job satisfaction that I wouldn't have gotten, and there were financial rewards as well.
Amazing. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
The best piece of advice I've been given, I'm going to go to a quote because rather than an advice from a person. So Clifford Stoll has this quote that is, and I overuse it probably, but it is, data is not information. Information is not knowledge. Knowledge is not wisdom. And the reason I like that is because I do live in this world of data, and there's so much data that comes in, and it's like driving down the interstate and passing billboards. You tune it out. So you have to take the data and turn it into information that's usable. But even then, there's decisions that you have to make based on it. So that goes from information to knowledge. And then when you can, using your background, using the data that you've had, make an intelligent decision based on that, then wisdom becomes the ultimate goal out of that.
Is what we're looking for. Absolutely. Who's helped you most in your career?
I have a mentor that was the guy who brought me from telecom into the small business world. And he's a Harvard Business School guy, and he was a VC guy for 35 years. And he's done, I've participated with him on some private placements since then. And it was, when I first met him, I was scared to death of this guy because he was, he just asked really hard questions, and I was really young and I didn't have the confidence, but just by surviving those questions and learning by watching him, and then kind of coming under his wing and watching him interact with other business people and everything, he's someone who I've kind of modeled my approach to business after.
Do you have any regrets?
I don't think so. I mean, I have plenty of failures, but looking back at the time, they were painful. But the wisdom of age, you look back and say, I learned something from that. And there are probably things I could have done that would have made my career better. But I've got a wife and kids, and if I made a decision that didn't help my career as much, it did help my family as much. So it's all about balance. And no regrets.
Cool. What are you most proud of?
My kids. That's a pretty easy one. So my son's a sophomore at Vanderbilt here in Nashville, and my daughter's a senior in high school. She's heading off to college in the fall, and they've just been they've been so much better at every stage of life than I was, and I love watching every minute of what they do.
Fantastic. What does legacy mean to you?
I'm going to go with my kids again, because so from the business world, I've told my kids I'm dying broke. I'm not leaving them anything. Everything that I gave them, they're getting in their lifetime. So, that means we're taking fun trips now and we're doing things, but they're not going to wait around for me to kick the bucket. Hopefully, if I need to be in some kind of home at the end or something, they'll have cash to be able to afford it, because I plan on going out without a nickel. But a legacy to me really is just in what you pass on to people while you're here. I don't think I think it's a weird situation to get in where you're trying to leave some kind of financial legacy behind you. I think it's really all about what mark you made on the world while you were here.
So interestingly, what is the new lifestyle? You said you're taking trips. Like, obviously we've been closed down for a pandemic, for God knows.
Well, very good point. So.
but what does the new lifestyle? Hopefully we're past this or going past this. What does the new lifestyle look for you?
Yeah. So in 2020, we had planned the Hopper family goes to Europe, and we'd planned, my daughter was going to be an exchange student in France. And so we were going to pick her up. We were going to stop in and watch some Tour de France, and we were going to take trains around and do all of Europe. And we didn't do it. So now I've got to figure out, okay, things are finally starting to lift. I was in New York last week, and they've even lifted the mask mandate in New York, which is, I feel like if it comes up there and then California, then it means maybe we're really, really beyond this. But I would like to get back to travel, but we're about to be empty nesters, and I'm busy with work. So that's a good question. I think it is still finding time to do those trips. And when the kids come home, and even if it's not doing trips right now, it's just spending that quality time with them. But like everyone, we've very much missed travel. And I think we need to replan the Europe trip. And my company has offices in Germany and in Taiwan, and about to open one in Dubai. So there's some sort of combo work, fun travel, I think, in my future once things open up.
Yeah, we're one of the passions for me and my wife is actually the Tour de France and cycling around Europe, and we've always wanted to do the last day, the Paris trip, go to Paris for, well, I was going to say a day, but for a weekend or whatever, and do the final day. And it's always crisscrossed at difficult times. We haven't ever been able to do it, and then we had pandemic, so everything's sort of. But it's definitely one of our sort of top things, either go to Alpe d'Huez or something like that and really experience it, or what's the other one? I can't remember off the top of my head at the moment. There's another mountain stage which we would love to do, but yeah, it's one of those. I think if you're into cycling, and it's the place to at least see it once. I'm fortunate; I've seen it a couple of times. It came to the UK. one in the late 90s, like mid 90s. It came to south of England, and it's been through London once before as well. So it's on the top of our bucket list to at least see one stage in France. What's the driving? Are you a big cyclist yourself?
I am. I'm a very heavy cyclist, but I'm a triathlete.
Right.
So I did. I haven't done. I did a half Ironman back in October, and then usually in the winter I switch more to running, and I'll jump on the trainer, but it's not the same as getting out on the road. So, I'm 210 pounds, so it's I'm putting some hurting on those bikes, and the uphills are tough, but boy, the downhills are fun.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Last one. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm probably LinkedIn is I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I've got a Twitter account, but I think I've got 20 something followers. I don't really post much over there. So LinkedIn, I've got a very static personal branding website. It's not worth really checking that out, but that's probably the way to go. And I don't know if you, it's just
if you're happy, we can add them to the show notes, the LinkedIn.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Insight, and then if you can then see people that reach out to you. Look, thank you, Glenn. Thank you so much for your time. I would actually be interested to have you back in a few months' time, and maybe talk about M&A, mergers and acquisitions. I think as you've been through that process, there's not that many people have come from the people that I've spoken to on this podcast have come from a founding experience as a pure founder, but actually your view on the financial aspect of M&A could be really fascinating. So I'd love to have you back on in a few months' time again and talk about that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Fantastic. All right, Glenn, thank you so much. It's been so fascinating talking to you. I've learned so much about startups and scaling businesses, and hopefully my audience has enjoyed that as well. And I think there's a lot of synergy in my thought process from being in a more corporate role and then moving to startups, which hopefully a lot of my audience have really enjoyed. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mark.
Cheers.